Sienna Clark had always believed that spaces held memories the way hearts did. At 31, she was already a respected interior designer known for turning lifeless houses into warm, magazine-worthy homes. When she married Daniel Brooks, a 36-year-old site engineer, she thought she was building both a marriage and a masterpiece. Daniel had inherited an old property from his late uncle, a tired 1980s structure sitting on a quiet street, its brown tiles cracked, its ceiling stained, and its walls painted in dull, aging cream. The first time Sienna stepped inside, she had clasped her hands together and whispered, "It's not ugly, it's just waiting to be loved." Daniel laughed then, dropping his keys on the dusty counter. "You're the only person who can look at this place and see romance." She smiled, already imagining sunlight through larger windows, walnut floors, sculptural lighting, and soft earth-tone palettes. "Trust me," she told him gently, "this house will breathe again." Over the next 3 years, Sienna poured her savings, her time, and her soul into the renovation. She stayed up nights sketching layouts, sourcing vintage furniture, and negotiating with craftsmen. Daniel would often walk in late, loosening his tie. "You're still working?" he'd ask. She would nod without looking up. Great design takes patience. At first, he admired her passion. He would wrap his arms around her shoulders and murmur, "You're going to make this place worth a fortune." But to Sienna, it was never about money. It was about building a home where love could live comfortably, or so she believed. By the end of the first year, the transformation had begun to show. The outdated tiles were replaced with warm oak flooring. The heavy drapes were gone, swapped for sheer linen curtains that danced when the windows were open. A custom mid-century sofa sat proudly in the living room, paired with a hand-carved coffee table Sienna had commissioned from a local artisan. One evening, she stood in the center of the room, adjusting a brass floor lamp. "Daniel, come look," she called softly. He walked in, glancing around briefly. "Yeah, that's nice." She turned, expecting more. "Just nice." He shrugged, scrolling through his phone. "Babe, I'm tired. It's furniture." The words stung more than she showed. "It's not just furniture," she replied calmly. "Every piece has a story." He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly. "As long as it makes you happy." But slowly, she began to notice the gap between them. While she obsessed over textures and lighting warmth, Daniel obsessed over quick money, crypto schemes, risky investments, flashy gadgets. Packages addressed to him arrived daily. One afternoon, she held up a receipt. "Daniel, you spent this much on a watch?" He barely looked up. "It's an investment." She inhaled slowly. "So is our future." He waved her off. "Relax, Sienna. I'll make it back." She wanted to believe him, but unease crept in like a draft through an unsealed window. The second year of the renovation was when Sienna's work reached its peak. She designed a statement wall covered in custom geometric wallpaper she had illustrated herself. The dining area featured sculptural pendant lights imported from Italy. Even the staircase was reimagined, glass balustrades replacing the heavy wooden rails. Friends who visited were stunned. "Sienna, this looks like a design magazine cover," her friend Mara gasped. Daniel would grin proudly then. "My wife did all this." But Sienna noticed something. He always said my wife, never Sienna. One Friday evening, Daniel hosted coworkers. Among them was a young woman Sienna hadn't met before. She was petite, sharply dressed, and overly curious. "I'm Lila," she said brightly, shaking Sienna's hand. "Temp admin at Daniel's company." She walked around slowly, touching surfaces. "Wow. Daniel, you never told me you lived like this." Sienna smiled politely. "I designed it." Lila tilted her head. "Oh, I thought Daniel hired someone." Daniel chuckled awkwardly. "Same difference." The comment lingered in the air. Later that night, as Sienna cleared glasses, she asked quietly, "Why didn't you correct her?" He sighed. "It wasn't a big deal." She looked at him steadily. "It is to me." He kissed her cheek dismissively. "You're overthinking again." But for the first time, Sienna felt like a guest in the very home she had built. Suspicion did not arrive loudly. It arrived in fragments. Late-night texts. Sudden showers after work. Phone calls taken outside. One evening, Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen island while he was upstairs. Sienna tried to ignore it until the screen lit up again. Lila, miss you already, love. Her hands froze. She didn't open the phone, but the message burned into her mind. When Daniel came down, she asked calmly, "How close are you and Lila?" He frowned. "What kind of question is that?" She wiped the counter slowly. "Just answer me." He exhaled sharply. "She's a colleague." "Who sends heart emojis?" she asked. He laughed dismissively. "You're being dramatic." But doubt had already rooted itself. Over the next weeks, Sienna noticed more: restaurant charges, hotel receipts, rideshare trips at odd hours. One night, she sat at her desk, screenshots glowing on her laptop. Her voice trembled as she whispered to herself, "Tell me I'm wrong." But the evidence kept piling up. When Mara saw the files, she held Sienna's hand. "Are you going to confront him?" Sienna's eyes hardened. "No, not yet." "Why?" Mara asked softly. Sienna closed the laptop. "Because when I do, I want the truth to have nowhere to hide." The confrontation came sooner than Daniel expected, but exactly when Sienna planned it. She invited both him and Lila to dinner under the pretense of celebrating the finished house. Lila arrived glowing with excitement, wearing a fitted dress and scanning the decor like it was already hers. "This place never gets old," she said, running her fingers across the console table. Daniel looked nervous. "Sienna, what's this about?" She smiled calmly. "Sit. Both of you." They did. She placed a folder on the table. "I believe honesty deserves an audience." Lila exchanged glances with Daniel. "I don't understand," she said. Sienna slid printed screenshots across the table, messages, receipts, photos. Silence swallowed the room. Daniel's face strained. "Sienna," Lila leaned back slowly. "Well, since you know," the boldness shocked even Daniel. Sienna's voice remained steady. "I know everything." She then placed another document forward. "Divorce papers." Daniel blinked rapidly. "You're overreacting." She shook her head. "No. I'm responding." Lila crossed her arms. "So, what happens to the house?" Sienna almost smiled. "Funny you ask." She tapped the final document, their prenuptial agreement. No division of premarital or individually purchased property. Daniel's stomach dropped. Lila frowned. "But everything here is Daniel's, right?" Sienna stood slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. "No," she said quietly. "Everything you're admiring is mine." The silence that followed Sienna's revelation felt heavier than stone. Daniel stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "You're serious?" he asked hoarsely. Sienna did not raise her voice. "I have never been more serious in my life." Lila let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "Okay, but this is still Daniel's house. You're divorcing him, not the furniture." Sienna turned to her slowly. "Every item in this home that was purchased during this marriage, I paid for. Every receipt is documented. Every transfer is recorded." Daniel swallowed. "Sienna, we can talk about this privately." She shook her head. "We are far beyond private conversations." He rubbed his forehead. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Her eyes softened, not with love, but with finality. "No, Daniel. I built this house while you built secrets." Lila shifted uncomfortably, but tried to maintain her confidence. "So, what are you saying? You're just going to what? Take a couch and go?" Sienna's lips curved faintly. "Not a couch." She stepped back from the table. "Everything." Daniel shot to his feet. "You can't be serious." She picked up her folder. "You'll see tomorrow." Her tone was so calm it unsettled them more than anger ever could. The next morning arrived quietly, but what followed was anything but quiet. At exactly 9 a.m., 3 large moving trucks pulled up in front of the house. Daniel, still in his robe, frowned through the window. "What the hell?" he muttered. The doorbell rang. Sienna opened it before he could reach it. A team of uniformed professional movers stood outside with clipboards. "Good morning, Miss Clark," the supervisor said politely. "We're ready when you are." Daniel's eyes widened. You hired movers? Sienna nodded. Of course. Lila, who had stayed the night, rushed down the stairs. What's going on? She asked, clutching Daniel's arm. Sienna stepped aside, gesturing inward. Gentlemen, please begin with the living room. Daniel blocked their path. Nobody is taking anything. The supervisor calmly handed him a document. Sir, we have proof of purchase authorizations and legal clearance. Daniel looked at Sienna in disbelief. You planned this. She met his gaze steadily. I prepared for the truth. Lila scoffed. This is petty. Sienna's voice remained level. No. This is ownership. The removal began methodically. The custom sofa was wrapped first, followed by the carved coffee table. Lila watched in horror. Wait, not that one. I love that couch. Sienna glanced at her. Then you should have asked who bought it. The brass floor lamp disappeared next, then the sculptural chairs. Daniel paced the room. Sienna, stop this. We can negotiate. She folded her arms. We had 3 years to negotiate respect. As the geometric wallpaper crew arrived, Lila's composure cracked. You're taking the walls too? Sienna nodded slightly. They're removable panels. I designed them. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. She tilted her head. No. Insane was betraying the person who built your world. Room by room, the house emptied. Artworks were lifted, rugs rolled, pendant lights dismantled. Each removal revealed the dull, outdated surfaces beneath, the original 1980s shell Daniel had inherited. The contrast was brutal. By afternoon, the dining room stood bare except for dust outlines where furniture once lived. Lila's voice trembled. Daniel, why does it look like this? He had no answer. Sienna walked through the space, one last time with her checklist. The Italian pendant lights were carefully lowered into crates. Handle those with care, she instructed gently. Daniel watched her, desperation creeping in. Sienna, please. You made your point. She paused but did not turn. This was never about making a point. Then what is it about? He asked. She finally faced him. Closure. Lila stepped forward angrily. You're leaving him with nothing. Sienna's expression did not change. No. I'm leaving him with what he came with. Her gaze swept the exposed walls. The original house. Upstairs was the most emotional part. The bedroom, once warm with layered textures and soft lighting, was stripped piece by piece. The bed frame Daniel had slept in for years was unscrewed and carried out. He sat on the window ledge, defeated. Did any of this mean anything to you? He asked quietly. Sienna folded silk bedding into a crate. It meant everything. That's why this hurts. He looked up. Then why walk away? She answered without hesitation. Because love without loyalty is just decoration. Even the walk-in closet systems she had installed were dismantled. Lila whispered, I can't live like this. Sienna overheard but said nothing. She simply continued directing movers with calm precision. By evening, the house echoed. Footsteps bounced off naked floors. The once warm lighting was replaced by harsh ceiling bulbs. The trucks were loaded. The supervisor approached. Miss Clark, final inventory complete. She signed the form. Daniel stood near the door. So that's it. She picked up her handbag. That's it. He searched her face for hesitation but found none. Where will you go? He asked. She gave a small, peaceful smile. Somewhere that feels like mine. Lila wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the empty living room. For the first time, she looked unsure of her choices. 2 weeks passed. Sienna had moved into a sunlit apartment across the city, smaller, but filled only with what she loved. She sold some pieces, kept others, and reinvested the money into her new beginning. One evening, her phone rang. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Daniel. His voice sounded thinner. Sienna, I need your help. She remained silent. He continued, the house, it's falling apart. Lila hates it. She says it feels like living in storage. Sienna walked to her balcony, looking at the skyline. It always looked like that before I changed it. Daniel exhaled shakily. She left yesterday. Sienna did not react. She said she didn't sign up to live in a time capsule. He gave a hollow laugh. Guess she liked your work more than me. Sienna leaned against the railing. Why are you calling? Because I was stupid, he admitted. And because nobody understands that house like you do. She closed her eyes briefly. I don't belong to that house anymore. But you built it, he insisted. She answered softly, and you broke what lived inside it. He tried one last time. I'll pay you. Just help me redesign it again. She almost smiled at the irony. You couldn't value it when it was given with love. Why would I rebuild it for money? He had no reply. The silence stretched until she said gently, You should hire a designer. They won't do it like you, he whispered. Her voice was kind but firm. That's the point. She ended the call not out of anger, but out of completion. Months later, Sienna stood in her new apartment, adjusting a modest brass lamp beside her reading chair. The space was smaller than the old house, but it felt lighter, free of betrayal, free of compromise. Her friend Mara visited, looking around warmly. It's beautiful, Sienna. Not as grand, but happier. Sienna smiled. Homes reflect the people inside them. Mara hesitated before asking, Do you ever miss the old place? Sienna thought for a moment. She remembered the stripped walls, the echoing floors, the hollow shell beneath her designs. Then she shook her head gently. Some spaces, she said, once emptied should remain so. She picked up her sketchbook, already designing her next project, not just for clients, but for herself. And for the first time in years, every line she drew came from peace, not proof. Weeks turned into months, and Sienna Clark settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but peaceful. Her new apartment overlooked a quiet tree-lined street, where mornings began with sunlight pooling across her oak desk instead of tension sitting in her chest. She worked from home more often now, taking selective design projects instead of overloading herself the way she used to when she was trying to prove her worth to Daniel, to his colleagues, even to herself. One afternoon, while reviewing fabric samples, her phone buzzed again. It was not Daniel this time, but his older sister, Marissa. Sienna hesitated before answering. Hi, Marissa. The woman's voice came warm but cautious. I hope I'm not disturbing you. You're not, Sienna replied gently. There was a pause before Marissa spoke again. I went to the house last weekend. Sienna leaned back in her chair. And Marissa exhaled slowly. It felt empty, not just physically, emotionally. Sienna did not know how to respond. Marissa continued. Daniel looks lost, Sienna. I've never seen him like that. Sienna's voice stayed calm. He made choices. I know, Marissa said quickly. I'm not defending him. I just wanted you to know he finally understands what he lost. Sienna looked around her peaceful apartment, the soft rug beneath her feet, the warm lighting she chose for herself. Understanding comes late for some people, she said quietly. But it still comes. A few days later, Sienna received an unexpected package. It was a small wooden box, the kind Daniel used to keep spare keys in. Inside was a folded note in his handwriting. She almost didn't read it, but curiosity won. I found this while clearing the storage room. Thought you'd want it. Beneath the note was her first sketchbook, the one she used when she began designing the house years ago. Her fingers traced the worn edges. She remembered sitting on the dusty floor, drawing renovation ideas while Daniel joked about her, turning ruins into dreams. Tucked between the pages was another note. I should have protected what you were building, not destroyed it. I'm sorry. Sienna sat quietly for a long time after reading it. Later that evening, Mara came over. You okay? She asked, noticing the sketchbook. Sienna nodded slowly. He returned my beginnings. Mara studied her face. Does it change anything? Sienna closed the book gently. No, she said. But it closes a chapter properly. Meanwhile, Daniel remained in the stripped house, trying to restore it piece by piece, but without Sienna's vision, the results felt disjointed. One evening, a new designer he hired stood in the living room holding samples. We can modernize the space, she suggested. Daniel looked around at the exposed walls. It used to feel alive. The designer smiled politely. That's what we'll recreate. He shook his head faintly. You can't recreate someone's soul. She didn't know what to say to that. After she left, he walked through the house alone. His footsteps echoed the way they had the day Sienna emptied it. He paused where the custom wallpaper once stood and ran his hand across the bare wall. You really built magic here, he murmured to the silence. But regret, he was learning, was a poor interior designer. It could only show you what was missing, never restore it. Back in her apartment, Sienna's life continued to bloom in quiet ways. She hosted small dinners, filled her shelves with design books, and even began mentoring young interior stylists online. One of them, a shy student named Elia, once asked during a video session, "How do you design a home that feels safe?" Sienna smiled thoughtfully. "You start with honesty," she replied. "Spaces feel the truth of the people inside them." Another student asked, "Have you ever designed your dream home?" Sienna paused before answering. "I thought I had," she said softly. "But now I realize my dream home isn't about size or luxury. It's about peace." After the session ended, she sat quietly, realizing how far she had come. She was no longer designing to impress, to fix, or to hold love together. She was designing to express who she truly was. Nearly a year after the divorce, Sienna received one final message from Daniel. It was simple. "The house is being sold. I couldn't live in it anymore. Just wanted you to know." She stared at the text for a moment before typing back, "I hope you find somewhere that feels right for you." He replied with a single line, "I hope you already have." She didn't answer, not out of bitterness, but because no reply was needed. That evening, she stood by her apartment window watching city lights flicker on. Mara, visiting again, handed her a glass of wine. "To new beginnings," she said. Sienna clinked her glass gently. "To chosen peace." As she looked around her home, every piece intentionally selected, every corner reflecting her growth, she felt something deeper than closure. She felt ownership of her life again. The past house had been grand, curated, admired, but it had also held betrayal. This smaller space held truth. And Sienna had learned something she would carry into every future design, every future love, every future dream. A home is not defined by who stays, but by what remains when the wrong people leave.